Hello, everyone. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. This is Patrick Kennedy, and I'm so excited today because I get to interview another Patrick, Patrick Dillon. He's author of Safe, Wanted, and Loved, a family memoir of mental illness, heartbreak, and hope, which is available as of May 4th from Amazon and other online retailers. He was good enough to send me an early a copy of it as he was writing the book couple months ago, and I immediately went right to it and called him up. I think you remember this, Patrick. I was so excited by your journey and the fact that I could tell you were really leaning in, but knew that it was going to be scary, especially with the stigma of these illnesses as they are, and your own concern about preserving your family dignity and privacy, and the worries about being public, but that was also offset by your own desire, like many of us who dive into this public disclosure, if you will, that there was a greater cause to be served by writing this book. Patrick,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
good to see you and welcome. It's
it's
so
great to
good to
see
be
you
with you.
too. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I certainly remember your phone call. It's not often that you get a phone call from someone that you admire so much. So yes, I definitely remember that, and thank you for your support and for your time. And you're right. It's been a journey for sure. First going through the struggle that we did, and then of course writing the book, and then deciding to go public with our story, which, as you know, is a big decision. But we're excited to tell our story and hopefully do our part to help end the stigma around mental illness, which is so important.
So important. And I just want to add that for all of us, learning that we're not alone, learning that we're not unique, that frankly, the same challenges each of us face in different ways as families when confronting a family member with a mental illness or addiction, how to respond to it while navigating the very complex healthcare system and so forth. All of this is contained within your narrative, Patrick, which is why it's such a great guide for families who are looking to learn themselves how to navigate the system, both internally in their own families and then externally in the healthcare system. You had some real advantages, Patrick, because you had family members who were physicians. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one theme throughout the book is family. The subtitle is a family memoir of mental illness, and that's really what I tried to capture. There are a lot of great books told from the perspective of someone who's suffering from a mental illness, and there aren't a lot told from the perspective of the caregiver, and that's what this is about. So my wife became very sick. It was a complete shock to us. We did not have experience with mental illness. Prior to that, she was 39 years old, very smart, very accomplished. We were extremely close, obviously. We'd known each other for 20 years. And so this book is really meant to do that. And I appreciate you saying that, Patrick. I really tried to include all of the different experiences and challenges that are associated with a mental illness in the family, including, as you talk about, trying to navigate the health system. You know this better than anyone, that there is not parity in the health system. And when you're stuck with a mental illness, it becomes very difficult to navigate and very frustrating. And that's captured in there as well. And you said it best in the title of your book. It's a common struggle. I mean, this is something that affects way more of us than we know. And as we went through this experience, we had friends that we had no idea were struggling reach out to us and tell us their stories, and we felt that adding our story was important for that reason. And yeah, the family that we had, that we have, that supported us through this ordeal, it was unbelievable. As you say, I have a brother-in-law who's an emergency room doctor. He was there the day that my wife woke up with acute psychosis. I honestly don't know what I would have done without
I
him.
know. When I read that part, I was like, oh, how blessed were you? to have him, and then he could call another relative of yours who was an actual psychiatrist on top of that. Must have been something to listen to that, but also knowing that you weren't alone. You had people who knew how to navigate the system.
Yeah, people that had experience with it, which I did not,
Right. Right.
and had experience with acute psychosis, acute mental illness, and could explain to me what was happening, and try through my shock to help me understand what we could do for my wife to help her in the situation that she was in. But the family members play a huge part throughout the book. As you know, I have several family members. My brother was very important, and all of the siblings on my wife's side were instrumental. As you know, there's a very colorful brother-in-law that actually drops everything in his life and comes and lives with us for 3 months, which was, again, just to have that kind of support. And I mentioned this in the book. I really don't know how people without that kind of family support go through a struggle like this, which makes the stigma even more destructive. When people really need help from their friends and their family and they don't feel comfortable reaching out to get it, it's something that it just has to change. You can't get through something like this without the support of people that love you.
I just want to make a big shout out for my friends over at NAMI and other groups that set up kind of family support groups so that when they aren't as kind of connected as you or I were, Patrick, they have outlets to kind of um, listen to other family stories and know that there are others who are trudging the road of trying to get their loved one the proper care while also navigating all their own feelings of confusion throughout that process. So you were really in a free fall. You did a lot to. You were mindful all throughout. It seemed to me that your own mental health was also kind of precarious, and that it felt like the floor could drop out from underneath you, but you kept it together. Can you talk a little bit about, how you felt like you had to hold on tight to the situation, make sure your kids were okay, make sure you try to manage everything? It just must have been something for you as well.
Yeah, and that was the whole part of the story was how do you navigate that? As you mentioned, we had at the time, we have two kids, and they're much older now. At the time, they were 9 and 11. It's it was hard for a grown adult to understand and process what was happening with my wife. Impossible for a child to understand what's happening with their mother. And I knew I couldn't do that alone. I am not trained to do that. I knew we had to get help. And so, in the book, I talk about trying to find the right therapist, the right counselor for my kids, making sure that they have the support they need, trying to be open and honest with them in a way that they could understand it, which is a challenge. Um, they gave me as much strength, I think, as I gave them, and I just knew that my wife, in her healthy state, would have wanted me to prioritize the kids and make sure that they had the support that they needed. Of course, another priority was making sure that she was safe. Part of the title, obviously, um, and that's a huge challenge when you have a loved one with a mental illness, because sometimes safe means not in your care. It's a hard thing to admit that you can't love someone to recovery. It sometimes it's just not possible, and that you need professional help. They need professional psychiatric help. They need to be in a place that's going to be watching them 24/7 to make sure that they don't do anything to hurt themselves, or to hurt others. And that all of those things play in to each other, because you have kids that don't know where their mother is. They're not allowed to go see her in the treatment center. You're only allowed to go visit if she accepts your visit. That's a really hard thing to go through. And how I kept it together, I guess I just wasn't willing to admit defeat. I wasn't willing to admit that my wife was gone. Um, as you read about it and as you understand that it's really a chemical imbalance of the brain that's causing the thought disorder. And I just believed that we could get her back into balance, that we could find a way to get her back. And that's what got me through it. It was just that faith that we could do that.
What I really loved, I kind of recalled my cousin, Mark Shriver, wrote about his father with Alzheimer's, and he talked about what a genuinely loving and compassionate human being Sarge was, my Uncle Sarge Shriver. And he differentiated, you could clearly understand that he was not confusing the dementia with the person, the human
Right.
being. And you, in your narrative about your wife, do such a beautiful job at highlighting her inherent generosity of spirit. And and it's very clear to make a distinction when she is having disturbing, disruptive thought patterns,
Hmm.
and how those are um, indicative of how the disease has taken over and kind of hijacked her, woman that you know, but you do it in a way as to also reinforce who that person is so as to not confuse the disease for the person. Could you talk a little bit about that journey? Because that's a very difficult thing, is to not personalize when someone is agitated and acting strange, um, not themselves, not to get angry with them, right? Not to blow up at them. Um, can you kind of talk a little bit about that journey? That's not an easy journey.
Yeah, for some reason, for me at the beginning, it was I had to separate her illness from who she is as a person. And to your point, it was such a dramatic difference in character that it became for me easier because it was so different. And I was always focused, especially with the kids, when talking to the kids about what was happening, that the things that were being said or the actions that were being undertaken by the person who was their mother, it wasn't that's not her, that's not the mom that you know, that's the illness. And that's what happens when someone has an illness of the brain. Because, we talk about mental illness and we make it sound like it's somehow disconnected from an organ of the body. Well, it's not. It's the brain. It's the most complicated organ that we have. And the thing that makes you uniquely who you are is your brain. And if that starts to malfunction, who you are is that person's gone. And I think couching it that way with my kids in our conversations help them better, maybe not understand it, but at least accept what was happening and have continued faith that the loving, caring, super affectionate person that was their mother was going to come back. And again, I wasn't willing to give up on her. And so, I talk in the book, I kind of use this terminology like I was fighting a war, a battle against this illness. And that's almost how I thought about it. It almost became a personified thing, was this illness, and we had to battle it back, and we had to do everything in our power to figure out what was causing it, and to come to some kind of treatment plan.
Yeah, well, tell a story about like that moment when you can tell she's slipping back into a psychotic state where, you've got, all the meds finally, and this is,
Yeah, yeah.
and then, but you cannot, you're like, oh my God, I can tell just the look in her eye, her little agitation, her fixation, her fixed thinking. You could
Hmm.
tell all the telltale signs, but you still need to kind of validate your own feelings, like it to others in your family. Is she looking like she's a little strange? Is mommy a little bit strange? That's a tough process, but kind of you describe any number of instances you kind of go through in the book about various times where she kind of regresses and relapses in her psychosis. Could you kind of describe that feeling of your heart pounding? You just know something is, you're back on shaky ground.
Yeah, and as the book progresses, I become much better at it and much more comfortable with it. So the first time it happened was it was terrifying. It was one of the scariest things probably the scariest thing I've ever been through, because someone that you know so intimately, I mean, you know how they think, you know them almost as well as you know yourself, and they're acting completely disconnected from reality. They have delusions that make absolutely no sense. That's a very, very scary thing if you've never experienced it. It's shocking, it's surreal, you don't know what to do. And you try at first to say, what are you talking about? The police aren't after you, you're not going to prison, there aren't hidden cameras in the walls, what are you talking about? But then you realize you're not going to convince them otherwise, and the way that their brain is working, that's real to them, that is actually happening, they have complete conviction in that. And so we at first thought it was a one-time event, and what's called brief reactive psychosis, which we at first thought, and then we thought she was better, and then we went through some of those signs again that you're talking about. So um, some paranoia that just didn't seem right. There's some other signs that I learned to look for. One is called concrete thinking. So that's a term that means someone with psychosis will start taking what you say literally. And we use a lot of idioms. We don't realize we're doing it, but if I said to you, hey, I'm going to run out to the store, I mean, I'm going to go get in my car and take a brief visit to the store. If I
Right.
say to someone with concrete thinking, hey, I'm going to run out to the store, they say, what are you talking about? You're not going to run to the store. The store is 5 miles away. How are you going to carry everything back that you run out to the store to get? That doesn't make any sense. So that's a clear sign. There's another sign called the centers of reference, which means that someone with psychosis believes that maybe a song that was written 20 years ago was written about their current state, or something that they're thinking right now. That's a clear sign. There's another thing that happens, which I call in my book kind of connect the dots with homonyms, but they get fixated on certain words, and certain words that are homonyms. So, pear could mean a fruit, it could mean two of something, it could mean, to kind of whittle down or pare down your thoughts. So all of those things are signs that would tell you something's happening.
So, Patrick, you were talking about some of the telltale signs that of your wife's illness, really rigid thinking or confusing,
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
euphemisms for in a literal way as opposed to figurative way in the way that they're
Hmm.
used, and the homonyms. Um, it really is a terrific story in terms of you get to really describe those anecdotes that bring to life these things that are otherwise just kind of DSM kind of criteria and scientific descriptions. I mean, when she says that Van Morrison was there to write the song, because of
Right.
your
Right.
personal experience, it really is helpful for people to go, oh, that's how that is manifest, or tell me what I said, the numbers, fixation on
Right.
things. Um, Kind of tell some more stories about that, because I think for the average person, it's really helpful. I think they have understandings about psychosis. We have, unfortunately, in this country, so many people with active psychosis who are homeless in our streets, and we have come to kind of dismiss them. It really is one of the great tragedies of our time that our medical system responds with urgency to another kind of physical crisis. But when it's a mental crisis, we get feared up, we get scared, and our system isn't designed to respond the way we would if that person was falling over from a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. Um, Talk a little bit about that, those anecdotes of psychosis as really as real as um, heart attacks and strokes. I know
Yeah, well,
you.
and yeah, I mean, and I mentioned this earlier. As I became more experienced with it, it became a lot less scary. And what you realize is that there's nothing to be. In some cases, I guess that I don't have experience with. You might have to be, fearful of the person, but in general, my wife was never a danger to anyone. There were times when I was scared that she was so confused that she might run off and this we might lose her, and that was concerning. But you know, what happens as you get used to psychosis and you understand it is you learn how you can manage it better for the person, and you stop. First of all, you stop being scared, and second, you learn ways that you can help them, um, just by being there, not trying to change their mind about something. Like I said, they have conviction. You're not going to change their mind, but also you realize that um, with the right treatment, you can get that brain chemistry back in line, and they can recover their thought process again. And that I really tried in the book to make it about the human experience, the fact that these aren't people that we should be scared of, and they're not people without hope. People that are suffering from psychosis, they need support, they need treatment. And yeah, I mean, I think what you said is absolutely right. It's very different for me now and I haven't walked down the streets of New York City in a year, in a little over a year and a half now with the pandemic. But you might, on business, I might be in New York City, and you will see someone, on the corner who clearly is suffering from psychosis. And it's very different for me now. I can't ignore that person. I see them and I know they need help, and it's a shame. It's almost a crime that as a society we're not helping the people that need it. I've thought long and hard, Patrick, and maybe you have as well, about how the stigma started. Why is it that the most important organ in our body, when it's malfunctioning, we treat it differently than if it's a heart or a lung or a broken bone? Um, it just doesn't make any sense, other than, as I think about historically, I guess if you look back hundreds of years, they didn't understand that it was a chemical imbalance in the brain. You clearly can see where the idea of demons and possession by the devil start, because when someone is psychotic, you don't know what's happened. I mean, it's very scary. And so, you know, hundreds of years ago, probably even 100 years ago, if you started showing signs of real serious mental illness, you're going to be ridiculed. You might be locked up. You might be put to death. And so we as a society learned, if someone that you love is showing signs of a mental illness, you need to hide that away. You need to make that as confidential, keep that secret to the family, because who knows what the implications will be, from society. And even though we're getting better, it's we still have so far to go. And that's the only, I mean, I've thought of long and hard about, why is it like this? Why do we treat mental illness so different? And it's really a brain illness. Why, if they can find an organic cause for psychosis, if there's a brain tumor, if there's something wrong with your thyroid, if there's a stroke or something, then it's okay. Then we can talk about it, and people are going to provide support and encouragement. But if we don't have a test that shows something wrong, then you have to keep it secret. And that's that's a real shame.
Yeah, I think obviously you said earlier about our agency. It's not who we are when we're active in the illness. And you also mentioned the words, I lost her. She was gone from me. It
Yeah.
was this scary feeling. Like, I think that's where the fear comes in, because of course all of us are that far away, as we know in life, from something which could take us outside of who we are. And I think that's a terrifying existential crisis for any single person. So I think that's where the mental health kind of stigma comes in. So no one wants to question my agency to make my own
Yeah.
decisions, be of
Yeah.
my own right mind. It's got terrible negative feelings associated with all of that. But you're right. This is, we're in a modern age. We understand the brain. We know this is neurological, all of it, even affective disorders, mood disorders, we all understand much more clearly now. Addictions, it's not a question of whether someone chooses every day to go try to alienate themselves from their family, risk themselves getting arrested or risk dying, on a daily basis. Like they wake up in any given morning and saying, that's what I'm going to do with my life today. That is totally the antithesis of a functioning social person that is us as human beings. So these are not of volition. So I think there's that, um, it's just it's a space that needs constant kind of search. Like you are one of our Lewis and Clark guides as you take your us along the journey with your family to understand this, because you write with a pen name. You're very sensitive about, is this a medical issue, neurological issue, or a psychiatric issue? I mean, you're going through all of that yourself in the story. I mean, you're searching as to why you feel you can't let any of your family and friends know what the real story is. You don't want to burden her wife. You don't want to, make it such that her potential employer, could discriminate against her. You got to keep it secret. Talk a little bit more about that, because that's frankly what we're up against. Your own, battle to come to a greater understanding is really clear throughout the book, and it answers your own question as to why in society are we still bound up tight with this and still treat it with such fear and distance.
No, you're right. Look, this was an incredibly difficult experience to go through, made 10 times, 100 times more difficult because of the stigma. And I didn't have, as I said, I didn't have experience with anything like this prior. All I knew was that these things were real. Her employment in the future could be limited if word of it got out. Um, Friends could look at us differently. Family members could look at us differently. Um, and that's something that, even though it shouldn't be, those those repercussions of the stigma are very, very real. And uh, and so yeah, I mean, as much as effort as I was putting in trying to find the the the, the cause of the illness, and supporting our kids, and just trying to do all the things that you need to do as a spouse and a parent, I was under much more pressure and stress trying to keep everything under wraps and keep it quiet. And I mentioned in the book, trying to limit her contact with the outside world. At one point, I walk away and I forget that I've left her with her cell phone, and I come back, and she's on the phone, and I have no idea who she's talking to. She's in the crisis center, and they have a phone there, which I didn't know, and I find out she's calling all kinds of people, and so as much as you try to keep this confidential and secret, when you're faced with an illness that is so severe, it becomes impossible. And at some point, I just gave up. It was too much, and I couldn't do everything. And that was when I prioritized everything: the safety and health of my wife, or the support and love for my kids, and their health. Um, Worrying about the stigma fell off the list. And honestly, once that happened, the amount of support I got was traumatic, um, from friends that didn't know what we were going through, knew something was wrong, but had no idea what we were going through, and then shared with me that they had a similar problem and they'd been suffering with psychosis since they were in high school periodically, or they were on medication for anxiety, or whatever it might be. And that really helped me a lot. And I know it helped my wife in her recovery, because you don't feel so alone. And you know that you have the support that you need to get better and to be healthy again. And that's why, again, the stigma is so terrible, because when people are ill like this, and it's not just the person suffering, it's their loved ones, they need support. And once I gave up on that, once I gave up on trying to keep it secret, it changed everything.
It's when I wrote my book, A Common Struggle, I kind of researched my own family's, attitudes towards addiction, which was, of course, ran through our family, and mental illness, and of course, trauma. And of course, I went back to President Kennedy's sister, my Aunt Rosemary, who, in addition to having an intellectual disability, which wasn't too profound at the time, but it kept her pretty, guarded and kept secret, so to speak, in the family. And then she had a co-occurring psychotic kind of experience with mania and sort of some probably bipolar like kind of symptoms. That's what really got my grandparents very frightened, because then she wasn't as malleable, and they couldn't like shelter her. So that's when they at the time had chosen to have a lobotomy for her, because at that time that was like what was offered as evidence-based, believe it or not, form of treatment for that. But the whole experience of that so understandably shaped President Kennedy's experience, because that was his closest sibling in age. That when he went on to become president, he didn't share any of it, right? And then second year into the presidency, he allowed my Aunt Eunice Shriver to start to share about it. And then how that opened up the whole world, because for the same reasons you're telling your story and the same experiences you had, when my Aunt Rosemary started becoming more public and my Aunt Eunice started celebrating her and her abilities, and then of course Special Olympics was created as a direct result of that, deciding, instead of being worried inside about what people will think, we're going to run towards the problem. And we're going to, now the problem is that we're so isolated and disengaged because of the fear and stigma. Now you look at Special Olympics on 190 plus countries around the world, the transformation for families who no longer feel like they have to lock their loved one up in a closet, or is currently the case in many parts of the world, chain their loved one to a stake in the ground so that they don't wander off. I mean, and in many places in the world, incarcerate people in asylums that we had 50 years ago, or even where we're in our own country, re-incarcerating people into asylums and called our jails and prisons. I mean, we're really at a point, Patrick, where we need to break the shackles of this old stigma that's such a hangover. John F. Kennedy was trying to break it 60 years ago when he signed the Community Mental Health Act of 1963, but we're still fighting the fight. And I just want to say all the power to you that you have taken your story public, because it's going to be this kind of narrative where you take it through the human experience, that you can demystify it for people. And I hope really help us chip away at this, old thinking that so often has dominated our approach to how we address it, which is really to be reactive in nature rather than to be proactive. So um, just tell us a little bit at the end about being proactive, um, writing the book, deciding to finally kind of get out there with this and go in the race towards the challenge. And what's it feel like to be in the midst of this?
I I I I had to write the book, just to process those memories from my own mental health. I really I had to write, and I did that, and I had a lot of pages, a lot more than what are in there now. And My wife read it, and she said, "Look, I think we need to share this story, because if it can help just one person, right? Don't we kind of owe it to them to tell our story?" At the time, I was reading a lot of books. As you know, there are a lot of great books, similar books on people telling their story. Your book, obviously, um, uh, I think Ellen Sachs, Jessie Close, her book is fantastic. And so it felt like, adding our voice to that chorus of people that are pushing against the stigma, um, was something that we had to do, because we we had lived through it, and we had come out the other end of it, um, as strong as we were going in, and that's something that doesn't always happen. uh, and we were very fortunate. My wife ends up, I don't want to have any spoilers, but it turns out my wife suffers from a extremely rare, very rare brain illness. And we're talking about less than, a hundredth of a percent. I mean, it's extremely rare, according to the hospital that treated us. But not everyone has the resources to go to a hospital like that. Not everyone has the fortune of seeing a psychiatrist who's such an expert. I guarantee you it's more common than what we think. And so if there's someone out there who is going through periodic bouts with psychosis, and this can help them, well, we have to we have to make it public. Now, as you know, that's not an easy decision to make. You feel compelled to tell it, but it's not just your story. It's your family's story, and it affects them as well. We had the great fortune, unlike some, to not be a member of a famous family, and so we could do this in a private way. We have certain family members that are very sensitive to the story being out there, um, and so we were very careful. My wife and I thought through it, and in the end decided I'll publish under a pen name, and we'll change some names and places. But I mean, it's our story. It's all real. I hope that in the book it comes through as authentic, because it's everything that happened. And again, we just hope it can help someone out there who's struggling. When I was going through this crisis, I was searching for anything I could find to help me understand and deal with the experience. There weren't as many books out then. That This is 11 years ago now. There's a lot more now, and I think every one that's added, um, to the collection is going to help. So yeah, so thank you. It's somewhat scary to be so public with a very, very personal story, but it also feels good to kind of let the world know what we went through.
Yeah, no, there's coming out from underneath the shame and secrecy and the isolation is so crucial to any hope for real success and recovery. Um, and I really commend you for laying it out. It is very authentic, and you turn out to be a very compelling writer. Who would have known, right, when you went into this that you were going to be an author? But you're a good
Yeah,
one, and
I never thought that, but thank you for the
uh,
compliment.
it really is a good. It's a good read. It's a quick read from paragraph from chapter to chapter, and you do have a very hopeful message. I think it really is a constructive contribution to the advancement of the movement for all people who are suffering. to have this book out there to help chip away at the stigma that really imprisons them on top of the illness of their brains that often take them hostage. So we got to set people free. We got to get them the help they need, and not relegate them so much to the streets and to these untenable conditions that too many people with these illnesses live under, simply because of these age-old prejudices that are not based in any reality. And and thank you for what you've done in helping to break the silence and advance the cause. And thank you so much for your total enthusiasm to be part of the common struggle and helping advance parity and advance anti-stigma efforts and anti-discrimination efforts, all of it. You're really running towards the challenge, and that's uplifting, especially for this Mental Health Awareness Month. So Patrick, it's been great to be with you. Just tell us again about where someone can purchase the book.
Yeah, well, thank you, Patrick, for all of your support. The book is available on Amazon for the next 90 days digitally. It's only available on Amazon in the Kindle store, but on a print version, it's available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and many other online retailers.
So I'll hold it up, and hopefully people can contact me and you, and I really want to get it out there. So I'm going to tell all my friends about it, and we can hopefully get more people to see, because you never know. Like you said, there may be someone out there who get their hands on this book who it will really make a big difference to them in their own journey. So that's a noble thing. So Patrick, great to be with you, and look forward to the journey ahead. It's just beginning.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate the support.
You got it.